Worthiness is a knowing and a believing that you have innate value that nobody else can take away. So the unworthiness side of that would be that you're undeserving. Nothing happens for you. You seem to have kind of this victim state of mind, and you can't seem to pull yourself out of it almost. That's how it feels for me. And you're like, I know there's something else, because deep down, we are all inherently worthy simply because we are.
Welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast, where we discuss all things identity, self-compassion, and fulfillment within and beyond motherhood. I'm Emily Rose Hardy, a mindset and self-love coach for moms. I am a firm believer that to be able to take care of our children, we must take care of ourselves first. This is not a parenting podcast. No, this is a podcast where we will challenge the societal expectations of what it means to be a mom, demystify the perfect mom myth, and learn to love ourselves. You are worthy, mama. Let's do this. Hey, welcome back to the Worthy Mother podcast. Today we are fittingly getting into a conversation on worthiness, specifically how feelings of unworthiness can exist as generational patterns and how we can break the cycle of low self-worth for ourselves and our children. Here to join us for this conversation is Dr. Stephanie Snyder, a Navy wife and mother of 4 who is also a mentor, speaker, and joy seeker. Through her simplified methods, Stephanie teaches women how to make the most of their time and resources while still being present with their families and easily creating the life they desire in a way that feels great while emphasizing self-care without guilt and shame to make the most of life. And I am so all about that. So I am so excited for this conversation. Stephanie, welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation. About me, I mean, you nailed it in a nutshell there. I am a mom of 4 now at this point. My kids are currently, my son's 16 and my daughters are 13, 8, and 6. So we're in all the schools. So I have really all the things aside from changing diapers going on at the same time. So it can be a lot. And there can be absolute moments of overwhelm. But, as I remind my kids regularly, this is my first time being a mother. And this is their first time being my kid. So we're going to give each other some grace here. But when I'm not being mom, I am a Navy wife. My husband's getting ready to retire in the next 6 months from the military, which is so exciting. So that's another interesting chapter for us. And then when I'm not doing that, I love to help other moms create the life that they want, because this unworthiness seems to show up at the worst possible times. And so I want to help give the tools to be able to move through that.
I love that. And I'm excited to kind of get into that, especially with your position as a mom of kids at different stages and navigating that. It's always fun to kind of hear different perspectives. We are going to be talking a lot about self-worth and those feelings of unworthiness that can pop up. I'd love to just kind of, before we get started, have you give us kind of your definition of what self-worth and feelings of unworthiness mean.
So worthiness is a knowing and a believing that you have value, innate value that nobody else can take away. So the unworthiness side of that would be that you're undeserving, that nothing happens for you. You seem to have kind of this victim state of mind, and you can't seem to pull yourself out of it almost. That's how it feels for me. And I mean, it's a big emotional mess inside. And you're like, I know there's something else, because deep down, we are all inherently worthy simply because we are. There's nothing we can do or be or have to take that away from us or to gain more of it. But there's this feeling that we get inside when we've had too much of the negative kind of programming, where you're like, this doesn't feel right, but it's what everybody's telling me. So how do I kind of peel back that layer and kind of shake off this? It's almost like a tar-ish is how I equate it to people, right? Because I had this analogy given to me one time. A mom was like, oh my goodness, I'm so worried about my kids. And I heard somebody say, the worrying energy is like a tar, like a thick, black, murky tar. She's like, why would you want to put that energy on your kids? She said, instead of worrying about them, pray for them. that's a much better energy that you're going to send out to your kids, because quite frankly, what's worrying going to do anyways? Nothing, right? And so I can picture kind of that unworthiness as like this just heaviness that just sits on us. It's not our natural state.
I love the way you've explained that. And it's kind of bringing imagery in my mind that I haven't really thought of before, but just how the worthiness is like so deeply internal and it just exists in there. And we're getting all this stuff from the outside and it's coming in and coming in. And it can kind of, it does break in and infiltrate into how we feel about ourselves. That's part of the human experience in a sense. But how knowing that internal piece of the innate worthiness we all have is within us and we can all know it. We can all reach it. It's just really being intentional about doing that. And sometimes there can be a lot of work that has to go into that, but it's there.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. It is there. And somebody once shared with me the vision of our bodies being a house, right? And there's so many different rooms, and there's all these rooms that we've shut ourselves off from because somebody said we were too much or this or too much or that, or we shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that. And so we have this massive house with all these doors shut. Well, our worthiness is behind one of those doors. And until we actually open it and check out that room, it's just going to continue to collect dust. But we have access to it, and we can make that decision to go into it.
So powerful. It's a really cool way to look at it. And it's empowering. I think is really the right word for that. It's empowering to know like it's within you. And even if you feel far from feeling worthy, I know that's something that a lot of women, a lot of moms struggle with is like, I don't even know what that means to feel worthy, but knowing that like it is in you, it's so exciting and empowering just to know that's there.
Yes, absolutely. And this may be relevant for other people, but I never had an issue with my worth until I was a mother for some reason. And I've been trying to kind of navigate that and figure out, okay, why did it start at motherhood? And the reason I felt it started for me was because when I was pregnant, I was like, okay, I've got this baby inside of me. Like I can protect it there. And once the baby was born, I remember thinking to myself, oh shit, there's a whole world out here that I cannot protect you from. And how am I going to navigate that? And then the whole comparison thing showed up. And quite frankly, I'm really happy that social media wasn't as prevalent when I was a new mom to my 16-year-old, because the comparison between this mom doing this and this mom doing that and all of this stuff, that really was what started to whittle away at my own worth. Was I saw all these moms who seemed to have all of the things together and their picture perfect family. And here I was trying to figure out how to get the laundry done. And it was the external forces that chipped away at my worthiness. It was nothing that was given to me. It was what I had put on.
Yeah, that is really interesting to consider how motherhood does, because I agree with that. It's obviously there are plenty of people who may have issues with the concept of worthiness before becoming moms or if they are not a mom, but it does do something to you to have kind of the responsibility and the, as a mom, we want to do best by our kids. I think that's true of nearly every mom out there, right? We want what's best for our kids and we can't give them the perfect life. We can't protect them from everything. And so there's a lot of internal turmoil that can come along with that. And if we take in, like you said, the messages and process them as meaning something about us and our worthiness as a human and as a mom, like I can't do that, so I'm not good enough or whatever it is, it can be damaging and it can be really hard to like exist in that space because we're not meant to, right? We're not meant to feel that way about ourselves.
No, not at all. But we're bombarded with, I mean, I remember the moment that my son was born, right? And all of a sudden it was like, okay, you have to do this. You shouldn't do this. They have to sleep on their back. They shouldn't sleep on their stomach. And you're bombarded with all of this medical information from obviously the doctors, but then you have all of your friends who are like, oh, let me give you all of my advice as well. And meanwhile, you're hearing all of this stuff and you're not tapping into your intuition, which knows best. Mothers know, we know, right? Like, when your baby's like what the cry is for, even though people will tell you that, no, the cries don't differ. We know the cries differ. You know that your kid's got a burp as opposed to a dirty diaper, right? Like we just know these things. But somehow when we're thrown into motherhood, all of a sudden, all of our knowingness goes out the window and we think we know nothing. And my mother was actually good at instilling this. She was like, you're a mom. You carried the baby, and, they're going to change all these medical things by the time your next baby comes. And sure enough, the way I delivered my first one was nothing like the way I delivered my last one.
Yeah.
They were like,
Believe it.
no, actually, we don't clean the baby. We just put them on you now for the first hour. And I was like, wait, what? That's not what you did 2 years ago with the last one. And they're like, no, this is what we do now. Okay.
Yeah, it is really remarkable the things that we take and make mean something about what we are able to know. And it really impacts our self-trust and how really it's always changing. And I mean, your kids, you have quite an age range in your kids, but it's really not, 10 years between the first and the last. And that's not that long.
It's not that long, but
not that long.
So much that changed.
Yeah.
Between this, having this OB and that OB and being a military wife, it was like, some people were like, oh, well, I have the same OB for all of my babies. And I was like, that's cool. I was like, I don't even know who was in my room and caught my baby for this one. And they're like, what do you mean? It's military. Like,
you go where you go.
Like, it's a training hospital. And there were probably 17 people in that room. And I don't know any of them. But my baby's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting to consider. I love just thinking about the way the messages we get impact us. And it's just bringing up a lot of that. Like there are so many things that we are told and we perceive and we take in. And so it's really important. And I love that we get to talk about this and consider it for ourselves. Like, where are we getting messages and what are we making them mean? And knowing that like we all do it and that it's normal to do that. And it's okay that we're doing that, but we have to be aware of it so that we can decide what we want to actually take in and listen to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know that when I first got started on kind of this personal development journey, we had just come back from Sicily and my husband was immediately thrown into deployment cycles. And I was a mom of 2 at the time and just trying to keep it all together. I was totally overwhelmed and didn't know which way was up. And thought I was putting on a really great face to people. And from the outside, it did look like I had all my shit together. But my kids, my energy was so toxic and it bled into my kids. And that was what actually caused me to change and decide I had to do something different because my kids were being impacted by my negative energy. And I'll never forget kind of the turning point for that. My son was probably 5 or 6. And I had reprimanded him for being a boy. I was overwhelmed. My husband was on another deployment or something. And I yelled at him and he climbed onto the bed and he said, I should just disappear. Nobody loves me anyway. And it was in that moment that my heart literally broke because that's exactly how I felt. And I didn't realize it was impacting my kids so much. So that's when I really started to dive into this. Steph, you've got to do something because you're screwing up your kids. Right. So I had to start to look at it and, look at the beliefs that I held and the patterns and the behavior and what it was all coming from. And it was, I, at some level, took on this belief that I had to do more to receive love. And I would wake up every day thinking, okay, today's the day. I'll do enough to feel loved today. That is not how it works. Not even a little bit.
That is not how it works. Okay, I want to take a moment just to acknowledge and appreciate you sharing that story and that reflection, because I think it's really important for any mom listening to know that we all, because you said you were presenting as somebody who had their stuff together, like you were, whatever it was, how people were perceiving you, and then the internal struggle and what's going inside the home can be really complex. And so sharing that is so important because we all need to know that like it's okay to not be okay. And there's also room for growth that doesn't just impact us, but it impacts our kids. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I just really appreciate the vulnerability to share something that I think a lot of people have experiences like that and just don't ever say anything. And it's like it never existed. And then it's like, oh, I'm the only mom who's ever had a moment that I'm not proud of. It's like, no, It
Yeah,
happens. We're human. We are impacted by things, and there's room for growth.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that in terms of the whole love portion, and
Mm-hmm.
this makes my husband crazy when I say it, but I chuckle every time I say it. I tell him that, listen, our kids are going to need therapy no matter what, because we're either going to love them too much or not going to love them enough. And it makes him crazy. He's like, our kids are going to be fine. They don't need therapy. Da, da, da. I'm like, no, no, no. They're going to have their own journey here. And we may not love them exactly the way that they want to receive love. And it's not necessarily our fault. That's going to be their journey. And he's like, I hate when you say that. I know. But it releases some of that pressure because there is so much pressure to not screw up our kids,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I mean, if any mother lays awake at night, it's because we want our kids to be successful and we don't want them to screw up. And how is this what we said going to be twisted and years later become a trauma? Like, we could make ourselves crazy, and I could just sit in the fetal position all day long and never do anything because of the worry of that. But there's this fine line where you're like, okay, I said it, now what?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I will be the first to apologize to my kids for acting like a crazy person and flying off my rail. Like,
Which can be such a beautiful learning
yeah.
moment for them. I always say, look around you. Every single human being was a child at one point, being raised by whoever they were raised by. And they're all not perfect. Even like the person in your life that is the best example of like a fulfilled, well-rounded person. They're not perfect. And so knowing that like your kids will not be perfect either, they will take things from their childhood and have to go to therapy. Okay.
Yes.
I want to get into that, like the generational patterns of unworthiness. So we've talked about that some already, right? How the way that we show up in our lives for our kids, we're modeling that for them. And then also the ways that we work on ourselves also impact them. I'm wondering if you can kind of talk to those generational patterns of self-worth.
Absolutely. So I remember, and some people may be able to relate to this. Some people may think it's super woo-woo and out there. But I remember being in the bath one night several years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I was sitting there, and I love being in the water. I have a direct connection with God, with source. I can tune in pretty quickly. My intuition is on fire when I'm in the water. And I was sitting there and I was talking through, what kind of the next steps were to my business. And an image of my mother's mother showed up in the bathroom. She was just sitting on the toilet, just not like going to the bathroom, but like, sitting there. And she looked at me and she said, "You're going to break this pattern of unworthiness." And I was like, "Excuse you, what?" And she was like, "Yeah." She's like, "You're going to break it for your mother. You're going to break it for your aunts. You're going to break it for your sisters. You're going to break it for your daughters. You're going to break it for all of the women in our family." And I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm good. Like, no, I think you've picked the wrong person, Grandma. Like, try again." And she was like, this is what's happening." And I was reminded of that just the other day. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. All right. Get to it, Steph." Right. And so even before that moment, I had begun to look at, okay, my childhood, because really a lot of these feelings of unworthiness do show up in our childhood, where we start to shut the doors off in our house, right, of ourselves. We start to close those doors because we're told we're too loud. We laugh weird, and, we're too much. We're too bubbly. We're too personable. Like, people will take advantage of your kindness, like da 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 da, right? And we're constantly shutting off these doors because we believe that if we're just the right amount, people will love us. And that is detrimental, because we're going to be loved for all of us, but somehow we got it into our brains as this little child that mom only loves me when I'm not loud and obnoxious. Dad only loves me when I don't cry and I listen to the rules. Well, right? It's no wonder that we have trouble expressing ourselves, because our parents only did the best that they could. And my mother grew up in pretty close to poverty. She was one of 7 kids, and my grandfather passed away when she was young, so she never knew her father. And back in the, 60s with a single mom with all these kids, it was a lot. And my mom was one of the younger ones. And so she got picked on and all these things. And she still has that cycle. She still talks as if she's not worth anything. And it's no wonder I also have those tendencies, because it's what I grew up hearing and how she responded to the world. And so that is a good picture to me as to how my kids are responding to me. So more often than not, my kids are going to do what I do, not what I say. More often than not. We all know this, right? We're like, don't eat that cookie for breakfast as you eat a cookie for breakfast, right? Like, we know. And so what kind of example are you showing up for your kids for? Because you can tell them to do all the right things, but if you're not doing it, then what does that mean for them? And my kids question this regularly. I have a great relationship with my children. They are also my greatest teachers, and I allow them to teach me. And so I remember one day my son had said something and he was like, Mom, why does Grammy eat chocolate cake for breakfast, but tell us not to eat chocolate cake for breakfast? And I was like, that's an excellent question. And I was like, she likes having chocolate cake for breakfast. Sometimes, like, if she eats chocolate at night, she can't go to sleep. Maybe that's it. And he was like, well, can we have chocolate cake for breakfast? And I said, no, I'm not eating chocolate cake for breakfast, so you're not going to eat chocolate cake for breakfast. Like, that's not happening here. And he was like, all right, okay. And then it just drove this conversation. Why do adults say one thing and do something else? And I said, well, a lot of the times they're not aware. They're not aware of the things that are coming out of their mouths. And most of our lives is habitual. Mm-hmm. We love routine. It is just how our minds operate. And so we're going to get into this routine. And until we snap out of a routine because somebody noticed it and pointed it out to us, we're probably just going to keep going along, right? Like, I grew up in New England and my husband is from the Midwest. And when we got married, he said, you say wicked too much. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you say it too much, you have to stop. It's annoying. And I was like, okay, fine. So I didn't realize that I said it as much. But the first time I went back and visited my family, I was like, oh, Lord, you people say this too much. It was every other word. And he looked at me and goes, yeah, it's annoying, isn't it? But we don't know until it's brought into our awareness. And then we get to decide, okay, so somebody said something that triggered you, right? Like, let's go there. Okay. Someone says something that triggers you. You can decide, all right, I'm going to take that with a grain of salt because I'm not really worried about their opinion. Or you can go, you know what? There's actually some value to that. Let me look at this. And I tend to be that latter where I will say, okay, I triggered somebody by something that I said. Let me look at it. Let me see what's there, or someone else triggered me, right? My greatest breakthroughs have been when someone else triggered me and I wanted to flip them the bird and never pay attention to another word they said. But those have been the moments that have created the most growth for me. So how are you allowing yourself to go through those moments? And then coming back to this, breaking this pattern with my kids, again, I allow them to be my greatest teachers. And so my kids will call me out on stuff, not intentionally, but because children have no filter. They don't. They have no filter. My 6-year-old is probably one of my greatest teachers. I'm like, why do you keep bringing up all of these things that I have to work through, right? So for a while, she went through this phase where she would say to me, Mommy, I'm sorry you got mad and yelled at me. And I was, what do you mean? She's like, I'm sorry that you got mad and yelled at me. And I was like, well, there's a reason she's using these words. And it's not just because she's a little 4-year-old. You are getting mad and choosing to yell at your 4-year-old daughter. How can we look at that? And so I would look at it. Okay. All right. I've looked at it. Right. But she brought it into my awareness. Whereas now I can be like, okay, yeah, I'm probably going to fly off the rails sometimes because I'm overwhelmed. I'm hungry. Right. That's like the biggest one for me is if I'm hangry, like, watch out, world. And so, yes, but I'll call myself out on it. Like, hey, I don't have a lot of patience right now. I'm really hungry. Let me get something to eat and then I'll address X, Y, and Z, right? It doesn't make me a bad mom, to admit that I have faults. I think it makes me a better mom when I can call myself out on it and still show up for my kids.
Yeah, I love that. Awareness always comes up. I mean, basically in nearly every episode of the Worthy Mother podcast, we end up kind of on awareness. And it's really become clear to me how important it is being aware of both the internal self, but also the way that we interact with the world around us. And I love what you said there about kind of seeing and learning about ourselves through our children. They're holding a mirror to us in a way, right?
Oh, absolutely.
They're letting us see our patterns. And it actually is a quite accessible way to gain that awareness without having to figure out where to look, right? It's like, okay, this is a mirror being held up to me. I can now take a look at those things and start to kind of feel it out. Where's this coming from? And I think when we are aware, we're able to be much more compassionate with ourselves, which is huge. It's hugely important because yes, we're going to mess up. We're not going to be perfect parents. Like, it's just off the table. That's not an option. And so knowing like we can look at ourselves, we can approach that. It doesn't have to be some scary thing of like, what are all the things I'm doing wrong? It's like, no, let me just get to know what my patterns are so I can decide if this is something that I want to spend energy kind of changing. And using our kid, not using our kid, that's not the right way to say it, but just giving that opportunity, right, from our kids to learn about ourselves is just so powerful.
Yes. Yeah. And they are so observant. They see all the things. And, there have been many, not necessarily characteristic, but behavior things that I've changed because they have been brought into my awareness, right? Like, I remember my oldest daughter one time, she just innocently came up to me and she was like, "Mom, why are you on your computer all the time?" And I was like, oh, shoot. Like, I wasn't even doing anything. I was checking email again for like the 100th time that day.
Mm-hmm.
But to her, I was always on my computer. And I was like, okay, this has got to be nipped. Let's figure something out. And so I started to create even more boundaries around when I was checking my email, how I was showing up, because it was interrupting me being present with my kids. We think, okay, let me just check my phone for 30 seconds, right? 30 seconds while your kid's like, "Mom, look at me," or when they score the goal, right? Like, that happened to me the other day at my girls' soccer game. I sent a quick text message to somebody about something later that day. And I turn around and she's got her hands in the air and she's celebrating. And I was like, I missed a goal. I mean, it was goal number 5 of the day, but like, for the 6-year-old, if you're not paying attention to goal number 5, she could care less that you saw the other ones.
Yeah.
And so it's about being able to put those boundaries around things, but still show up for yourself.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my 2.5-year-old. If we leave our phone on the couch or whatever, he grabs it and brings it to you. You're like, oh, that is an association you have that I always have to have my phone on me. And it's been something that my husband and I both, we try and leave our phones on the counter where he can't see them and kind of like, look, we don't always have our phones, but it is something, it's that mirror holding that to you of like, this is something that I didn't even, I didn't even realize this was something that you were taking in, but you are. And so, okay, I know it now. And what am I going to do about that? And it's going to be there's going to be so many things in our journeys that we can say that about. And it's okay. It's part of
it's part of
the world we live in. Yeah, we're going to have habits we've fallen into, patterns we've fallen into from our childhood or from the way the world is right now. And whatever it is, it's going to happen. But being able to like bring the awareness to it is amazing. And then having the compassion to say, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of talk a little bit about with that idea of breaking generational cycles and like doing better for our kids and, showing them ourselves, modeling the really embodiment of feeling worthy. I think in today's day and age, we talk a lot about breaking generational cycles, which is incredible. It's beautiful, but it's also a ton of pressure. What are your thoughts on that? How do you navigate that? What do you say to moms who feel like the pressure to break all the cycles is right squarely on their shoulders?
Yeah. So we're not going to all do it in one day. Like, plain and simple. You're not just going to whiz through all of these things in one day, just like you're probably never going to actually be done with laundry. Laundry will never be complete. So stop trying to check it off of your list to move on to the next one. Your kids are never going to be done eating. So your kitchen will technically never be closed. Like there are some things in motherhood that will never be complete, ever, right? Like even when they go off to school and they're empty nesters, they're still probably going to come home looking for mom's homemade whatever, and they're going to bring their laundry from college. It just is what it is, right? And so trying to tackle it all in one day is not going to happen. But you can get intentional with saying, okay, I'm noticing this thing showing up for my kids. Let me work on it for me. Because obviously, if it's showing up for them, it's somewhere in me that maybe I'm not aware of. So, for instance, my 13-year-old and we recently, within the last couple of years, really healed our relationship. And part of it was there's a part of her that reflects a part of me that I didn't want to love. And I came to terms with it. I was like, all right, she's about to be a teenager. Like, I've got to do something with this relationship or it's going to be gone. It's going to be out the window. And so I said, all right, meet her where she is. What can we come to terms with? What do we have in common? Where can we start to heal this relationship? And she's a soccer player and she will tell you that that's her thing. She's an athlete. She's not a girly girl. She doesn't believe in wearing skirts. Whereas while I am an athlete, she used to think I wasn't as good as an athlete because I wore dresses and skirts. And she was disowning the girliness side of her while I was trying to force it upon her, essentially. And so I said, okay, I've got to meet her where she is. So I took her shopping at Lululemon. We came to terms with it. I joke with my husband that I bought her affection at Lululemon. But it was that step in saying, okay, I see you that you don't want to wear a skirt. So let me find something here that we can have common ground with and let's build from there.
Mm-hmm.
And now she wants to do everything with me all the time. She asks me questions all the time. She talks to me all the time. But now we have this honest, open relationship where I can look at her and go, you're not showing up in your greatness. Be better. And she can take it. And she can also say, you know what? I don't like when you do this, Mom.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this past spring, I was asked to be an assistant coach for her middle school soccer team. And day 4, she was like, Mom, you're not a good coach. I don't like how you coach. You don't know what you're doing. You never played soccer. Right. Like our kids think that we like never grew up. Right. And that we were just like immediately a parent and there was no childhood before that. Whereas I was actually a very, very good soccer player and I know what I'm talking about. But to her, I was never any of those things. And so she was like, you're not a good coach, Mom. And in that moment, I remember pausing and thinking to myself, okay, you could absolutely lose your shit right now. And you would be fine. And people would be okay with you doing that. And everyone else would be like, well, yeah, she said some really crappy things to you. No wonder you lost it, right? Or this could be a learning moment for both of you. And I was like, okay. So I started to slow down and I looked at her and I said, you're right. I am a different coach. I do coach differently than your travel coach. And I'm going to coach differently than your travel coach. I said, and if you don't want me to coach your team, I will not coach your team. I don't have to do this. I wanted to do this because I thought it would be fun for us to do together. If you don't want me to be your coach, you just let me know. It's fine. Yeah, I'll be sad because I did want to do this, but if you don't want me to be your coach, that's cool. Totally fine, right? And all of a sudden she was like, oh, wait, Mom heard me. So let me decide. And she did. She said, you know what, Mom, you do have different coaching, but I do want you to be a coach.
Mm-hmm.
I gave her that opportunity as opposed to being like, no, I'm the parent. I get to decide, right? There are moments where I get to do that, right? Like, yes, but I gave her this opportunity and it empowered her and she showed up differently. And then our relationship went to another level because all of a sudden she was like, well, shoot, like Mom didn't lose it on me. She actually held a conversation with me. And that is, I mean, super powerful and just reminds me of something that I try to tell moms as much as possible is do not take anything personally that your children say to you because they are emotional little creatures that are just spouting out chaos regularly. right? Like my 5-year-old, well, she's 6 now. She has told me that she's hated me regularly. Like, yeah, it hurts my feelings, but it's because she's upset about something else and she feels safe enough to tell me that because I'm still going to love her at the end of the day. And so, yeah, she's said it to me. She's thrown things at me. Like, she loses her crap. And my son will be like, you would have beaten me if I did any of that stuff to you. I don't know what to tell you, son. Like, I have a different mom than I was. Like, I'm choosing different battles, but she's just this emotional little thing that's like, but they also all do it to me the second I pick them up after school. They unload on me. And it's because they are being taught in school to listen, to pay attention, to follow the rules. And they've been shoving down their emotions all day long because they don't want to be the bad kid in school. That when they get in the car, they emotionally vomit all over me. It's just what happens. So I come prepared. I had enough terrible afternoons to learn the lesson. I bring snacks.
Perfect.
And we have a dance party sometimes to get that emotion out from the day where they can yell and scream and not get in trouble for it. And I think that's been one of the best things for them, is to have that space where they can lose their minds and know that I still love them.
I love it. And everything that you're saying, all of those different little pieces, something that is just coming forward in each is it's like, it's all about your growth. And I don't even mean that in like you becoming better or anything like that. It's not like one version of motherhood versus another is better, but it's just you giving yourself the space to reflect, decide how you're going to handle something, and then choosing that instead of just reacting, right? And it makes such a difference, and then gives our kids the space. We show up differently, right? We show up in a way that is more intentional, and that is going to be good for them. But it's also showing them that they can take that time to reflect and to be intentional with their choices and how they show up and continue to grow. Because again, like it doesn't stop. Life continues to go, and we are continually growing up until we're not anymore, right? Like it's just, we don't stop. And I think we kind of, as children, get this idea that when you're done growing up, you're done growing up, and you just get to be
just
this
know
adult.
all the things.
Yeah. And we internalize that too. Like, well, our parents, they know all the things. Obviously they've got it all together. So any of their faults must reflect on us as kids, right? Like it's us. And then when we get to adulthood and it's like, no, we're all continually growing up. Oh, I can see that. Wow. I think back to growing up. My parents were young. They were learning. I was their first kid. They had never done this before. Wow. Like it's a whole different lens to view it with. And it just is so powerful to think about and just to reflect on how like that shows up every day for us.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, just with like thinking about worthiness and thinking about how we can kind of cultivate those feelings of worthiness in our own lives, do you have any tips for just how to really bring that forward in, day-to-day happenings?
Absolutely. So the best thing that I have done is to, one, sit in the unworthiness. It sucks. It really is not fun to sit in, but if you continuously avoid it, it just prolongs it. And for me, and this is me knowing enough about myself, when I'm feeling unworthy, I start to do a bunch of other stuff. Like I'm the cleaner, where like, if I don't want to sit with my emotions, the house is going to be spotless. And people know that. And they're like, oh, your house is clean. What happened today? How are you feeling? I'm like, well, I didn't want to sit with it, right? But when I eventually sit down and face it, usually that unworthiness doesn't last very long. And it just wants to be heard, right? So I like to imagine it as like, I use my 6-year-old as the image for this all the time because she's like a spitting image of me at that age. And so if my 6-year-old was feeling unworthy, how would I respond? Well, chances are I would sit down and hold her and hug her and let her cry. So can I do that for myself? Yes. So why am I avoiding it? Because I don't want to make this feeling wrong, right? Because I shouldn't feel unworthy. I should be grateful all the time, like all these things that we tell ourselves, right? But an emotion is not good or bad until we judge it. And oftentimes we judge them as bad. Like, unless you're happy and excited and bubbly all the time, every other emotion is bad. Bad to be sad. It's bad to be angry. It's bad to yell. Like, no, it's just an emotion. And so can I sit and feel the unworthiness? Yeah, okay, I'm sitting, I'm feeling it. What does it want to tell me? Is there something that I need to work through? Is there, something that's making me feel this way? Did I take on somebody else's energy today to like make me feel like crap? And oftentimes it's not because of anything that I was doing or not doing. And sometimes it's just somebody else was like feeling crappy and I took on their energy by mistake. But I can sit there and go, okay, I'm feeling unworthy because I didn't do X, Y, and Z. Right. Well, my worthiness isn't based off of what I do. So am I still worthy? Yes. Okay, cool. Next, right? But when we push it off, it just takes that much longer to move through it. So I'll identify the emotion. Okay, I'm feeling blah. All right, about what? And I'll sit through it. And it usually doesn't take me that long. And I can coach it through my head, right? But letting it go gives me the power to choose something differently. And then I can step into, okay, well, I was born worthy. Nothing has changed. Cool. All right, next, right? Like nobody can take that from you, no matter what.
Yeah, it's again that awareness, the not just living in autopilot and letting the things that come in just be there without examining it. When we look at things, a lot of times it's like, oh, I can actually figure out the meaning of this and compare it to like what I actually believe. Okay, I believe that I am worthy and I'm making myself feel unworthy because of XYZ. And I know that that's not true. So now that I'm looking at it, I can choose to feel a different way about that. And it like, yeah, I may feel it crap right now and that's okay. But it's not just like letting that crappy feeling prolong for the rest of the day because you never looked at it. And that's not helpful. That's not good for anyone. There's ripple effects into how we show up in our work and how we show up in our lives and how we show up for our kids. And it's so unnecessary.
Yes. And I actually just had a really cool imagery come through for that. So, that unworthiness feeling, like I'm imagining a basement flooding, right? Like the water is just consuming your basement with this unworthiness. And we're standing there with a bucket in the water, trying to get all of the water out of the basement instead of just turning off the nozzle.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like you can just turn off the nozzle of the emotional negative spin that we're on. You can sit and turn it off and then let the water go out on its own. But instead, we're like, no, let's let the negative unworthiness run and try to scoop it out with a bucket. Like, okay, that's not helpful.
It's not. And if we don't recognize that there's the other option, then it's the only option. Yeah, I love that. That is a great illustration of that. Just how I love a good analogy.
Yeah.
This has been an awesome conversation. Obviously, worthiness is a huge part of my work and with the name of the podcast, like really just understanding our worth and understanding how we can show up in life with that being something that we're aware of. I mean, it's such an elusive concept sometimes. So I love that we get to kind of shine a light on it, make it more tangible and how we can actually show up in life knowing that we are worthy and all that brings to us. So I'm so excited about this. I'm all about normalizing self-care. I know that's something that you also talk about in your work. Moms taking care of themselves is important. So I'd love for you to share with us, what are some things you do for self-care? And do you have any tips for moms to make sure that they are also caring for themselves?
Absolutely. I love this. This is an excellent question. I actually had a facial today, so I've been noticing like how great my skin looks in this video.
You're glowy.
But my self-care did not consist of facials at one point. I could not have, years ago, I wouldn't have been able to do that guilt-free. Certainly not a massage, never like consistent nail care or hair care. Like there was a time where none of that could be done without me thinking that I could have bought something else for my kid. When I had that breakthrough moment with my son, I realized that I had to start loving myself first, because the only way I could give more love to them was if I had some to give first. And so I had to sit down and go, okay, what will help me feel loved? How can I love myself today? And it started with simply getting up a little bit earlier and journaling, or actually making myself lunch and not eating the leftover chicken nuggets or grilled cheese that my kids had had for lunch. Because I knew they weren't going to eat it anyways, so why would I make myself something for lunch when it was just going to be on the table? But that kind of food didn't energize me. And so I started to change my diet. I started to be more intentional with the foods that I was putting in my body. And then I started to get back into working out again. And these were all things that didn't cost me anything extra, but it was time set aside intentionally for me. And as babies number 3 and 4 came along, there had to be adjustments to that where I was like, shoot, I'm going to the bathroom by myself. I'm locking the door, right? Like some days that was my self-care because it was total chaos some days, right? But the thing that was never self-care was scrolling through social media. Never, ever, ever was that any kind of self-care because that typically only made me feel worse. Now I have a lot of feeds that are uplifting and I've been very intentional about who I follow and when I even get on social media. But that was never a self-care for me. And so now self-care, it's longer, right? Like my kids are sleeping through the night most nights, unless there is a nightmare, right? Or somebody gets sick, heaven forbid. But I can get up earlier and I can do yoga or go for a run or journal. And I usually have about 90 minutes to myself in the morning before I even have to get my kids up and get started for school. And there are days where I can hit the snooze button and be like, screw it, I want an extra 90 minutes of sleep. And there are some days where I do that. But I know that when I have that time to myself and that time with reflection and with God, I'm a better mom the rest of the day because I've already filled myself up. I feel loved. I'm excited for the day. I set intentions each morning as to how I want my day to go. And I can show up very differently for my kids that way. And again, it doesn't have to cost you anything. Self-care can be free, but it's something that you do for yourself, guilt-free, that has no other purpose but because you want to. And that can be really hard. I've heard so many moms say, well, I'm a mom. I don't have any other hobbies. The hell you don't. You have other things that you'd like to do. You're just talking yourself out of them because you think your kid needs your attention 24/7. They don't. They don't. Like, I love playing with my kids. I also love watching my kids play with themselves, with their Barbies, with their sisters, with their Legos. Like, to sit and just observe my children play together, it brings me so much joy and fills me with so much love that I'm good to just sit there and watch that. But I don't have to be engaged. I can just observe there. And that's perfect. And I can do it guilt-free. I used to feel guilty that I wasn't playing with them. They have their imaginations. And occasionally when they're playing Barbies and they say, Mom, I'll go, what? And they're like, we're playing. Leave us alone. We're
right? Like talk about the mom Barbie.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We weren't talking about you. We were playing. Mom. Okay. But I like to also observe their play to see if there's anything that they're portraying about me that I could reflect on, right? Like a little quick story. One day, my second daughter was sitting in the bathroom with her Barbie laptop, sitting like on the toilet, and she had her little chair in front of the toilet and she had the door shut and my husband walked in and she was like, I'm on a call. And she shut the door. And I was not in a great state for that. And I burst into tears because I thought she was like, Mom doesn't pay attention to me. She's on a call. But my husband saw it as endearing and modeling who she wanted to be. And he's like, I saw that as like beautiful. Why did you get so upset about it? Because I saw it differently, right? Like, okay, chill out. Not everything is personal. Not everything is an insult. You'll be fine.
It goes to show the complexity of just existing and navigating connection and relationships with other human beings and how we are going to interpret things the way we're going to interpret them. And that's okay. There's no perfect answer. There's no perfect way to show up and exist in the world, but we can give ourselves the space to feel good, to check in with ourselves and really like be intentional with the way that we're showing up and thinking about things and navigating our feelings, but also knowing that it is so complex and
And there's no
it'll be
right
tricky.
or wrong way to do it. It is what it
Absolutely.
is, and you can do it any other way. One last visual that I had that someone gave to me recently. There's this talk about balance in
Mhm.
motherhood, right? Like, and for me, I never resonated with the word balance, and so I used harmony, right? Like, there's a harmony between your work hours and your motherhood hours. But somebody gave me this visual recently, and she said, "Okay, imagine a scale, and on one side is a book. And on the other side, to balance that scale, somebody has a banana, a paperclip, a cup, a tissue, like whatever, right?" She's like, "But they're the same." She said, "Now on somebody else's scale, they have that book, but then they have like a roller skate and they have, like this and they have that and they have this." They're like, your combination of balance is going to look totally different than somebody else's combination of balance. It doesn't make yours wrong. It just makes it different.
Mm. So powerful. And just, I think that's a good thing to take for a lot of different components of our lives, knowing that it's not wrong, it's different, and we have choice. We have
hmm
the ability to reflect on what we actually want, what we actually desire, and how beautiful is it that we just get to continue growing and learning and creating these lives.
Yes.
Stephanie, this conversation has been absolutely amazing. I am so grateful for you being here. As we kind of wrap up, I'm hoping you can share with us where listeners can find you and if there's anything to keep an eye out for.
Absolutely. I love that. So I hang out on Instagram a lot. Stephanie Snyder, PhD. That's the best place to find me. There are some things in the works. There's YouTube channel coming up. There's going to be a podcast coming back in because I'm feeling pulled to go that way again. But in terms of, if you're interested in working with me, send me a message, DM me. I'm only taking private clients right now. There are some group things in the works, but haven't been finalized yet. I'm kind of letting those simmer because I want to launch at just the right time. But private mentorship is the best place to get started.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. This was one of those conversations that I think have the potential to make a real impact on anybody listening. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I do appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Yes. Thank you so much for tuning in and, just right in line with this conversation. You are worthy, Mama.